You are listening to the Billy D's podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you have never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. My name is Billy D's, and on the studio line, I have D.H. Morris. D.H. Morris, so glad you are here.
Thank you. I'm really grateful that you had me here. I love it. The opportunity to talk about the 9th century and my book.
That's great. And you know, that's an interesting point about the 9th century. And it's going to be one of my first questions. But just to let the audience know just a little bit about you, D.H. Morris, a native of San Diego, California, has lived on 4 continents and traveled through countless countries. Now residing in Kansas City, Missouri. And a lot of people don't know that Kansas City is in Missouri, by the way. She's a proud mother of 4 children and a grandmother to 11. A published playwright, she has recently turned her passion for history into a novel, The Girl of Many Crowns, set in the Kingdom of Francia. Is that the proper way to say that? Francia?
That's how I say it.
Okay. In 856 AD, the book tells the gripping, true story of Judith, the first princess of France, and Baldwin, Iron Arm, a knight of King Charles the Bald. Together, they defy an empire, embarking on a daring journey that will change history. As a descendant of both Judith and Baldwin, D.H. Morris uncovered their remarkable tale while working on a genealogical project. Intrigued, she dove deep into the 9th century, researching everything from politics and war to food, clothing, and marriage customs. She is passionate about this remarkable time in history when the European countries we know today were being formed and fighting for their very existence. And this was going to be my first question, this time frame here, because this is a time frame you don't hear a lot about. You know, you hear a lot about the time of Christ, give or take a few centuries. You know, Alexander the Great, of course, the Roman Empire, Cleopatra, Caesar, and all that. And then as you get up into the Middle Ages, you know, then you start hearing about the Tudors and this, and that, and the other. You really don't hear too much about the 8th century. That's something I'm pretty good with history, and I got to tell you, that time period, I don't know much about it at all. What was intriguing about that time period for you?
Well, this is the period of time which is often referred to as the Dark Ages, but this is also the Carolingian Renaissance. And it begins with Charlemagne, and Charles the Bald is Charlemagne's grandson.
Mm-hmm.
This is a period of time that a lot of people don't know much about, but should. So much happened. We have Charlemagne's empire is now broken up between several. It's given to his son, Louis the Pious. When he dies, it's separated into kingdoms. His son, Louis the German, has a good portion. And then his youngest son, Charles, who were historians have named Charles the Bald, although he wasn't bald, probably, gets a portion. And his son, Lothar, gets a portion. And then there is this civil war because the older sons, Lothar and Louis the German, don't want to give a portion to their half-brother, Charles the Bald. So he is fighting to retain his portion. And in this period of time, Charlemagne really started the education of men and women. His goal was to educate everybody in his kingdom, in his empire, which was very unusual. The Carolingian form of writing was developed during this period of time. That is the form of writing that we use today. That's our handwriting, basically. And a lot of people don't know that. We have here a very volatile period of time. We have attacks by Vikings who are trying to overrun, especially Francia, which is basically becomes France. And we have Louis the German trying to take his brother's kingdom. So we have Charles the Bald surrounded by Vikings, by his brothers who want to take his kingdom, and he also has rebel lords who want to take his kingdom. So he is in the middle of a very dangerous period of time. He arranges a marriage for his 12-year-old daughter, Judith, to try to shore up relations with the King of Wessex. The King of Wessex is a widower. He's about 50. His name is Athelwulf. And his son is Alfred the Great. But Alfred is only about 8 years old at this period of time. And Judith is only 12, actually 11 when the book begins. Okay. We have Baldwin Ironarm, who is the son of a count of Flanders. He comes to the court to serve, thinking he's going to be, on the battlefield. But instead, he becomes the companion, the mentor of Judith's younger brother, who is 9-year-old Louis, and historians refer to him as Louis the Stammerer because he has a stammer. And Charles the Bald wants a mentor for his son because he's very disappointed in his son. He needs a warrior. And Louis has to become the provincial king of Neustria at age 9. And he is made king. And that's a lot of responsibility for a 9-year-old boy who has a stammer.
Yeah.
Well, his companion, Baldwin Ironarm, protects him, defends the kingdom. He defends him from assassination plots. And a lot is going on there. He defends him against Vikings, and he's involved in a lot of things. Whereas Judith, who is married at 12, as soon as she turns 12, which is the legal age for a young woman to be married in those days, goes to Wessex and becomes the first anointed queen of Wessex. Before that, Wessex refused to have queens. They just had the wife of the king.
Okay.
But because she is the granddaughter of an emperor, Louis the Pious, her father thinks, okay, so if we have her marry the King of Wessex, then she has to be an anointed queen, or we're not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of positions so that the King of Wessex almost has to accept this. So there, the King of Wessex, his older son is trying to steal his kingdom, and he sees it as an advantage to have an alliance with the King of Francia.
Mm-hmm.
So she's used as a pawn in this for a year and a half, and then Athelwulf dies. Then her father wants to continue that, so he arranges the marriage of her to Athelwulf's eldest son, the one who was trying to steal Athelwulf's kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Not a very nice guy.
Mm-mm.
After that second marriage, and she is widowed twice by the age of 16, she comes back to France, and her father wants to arrange a third marriage. He's not happy that she came back without his permission. But she has become very strong and willing to stand up for herself. And when he wants to arrange a third marriage for her, she says, no, I'm not going to marry again unless it's my choosing. So he imprisons her in the palace at Senlis. And kings in those days were itinerant kings. So they had a numerous palaces, and they would go from palace to palace and maybe stay 6 weeks, maybe a couple of months, because it was important for them. They didn't have internet. They didn't have a phone. You had to be present with your nobles to establish relationships and to make sure nothing funny was going on in that part of the kingdom. So they would move from palace to palace, and also it kept them from overburdening the nobles in the area, who would, of course, provide a lot of special foods for the king. You've got all this huge group of followers and to support the king, who needed to be fed a feast every single night. And so this was why there was an itinerant kings. And that was basically the way it was in both England and in France, or Francia. That was just the way it was. They managed their kingdoms. But the history here is, we follow 7 years in the history of England and France and Germany and Italy, and that it's just the development of Europe, and they're fighting over borders, over who's going to be the ultimate king or emperor, because we have emperors as well. And so when she is imprisoned, her brother Louis the Stammerer and his companion, Baldwin Ironarm, visit her in the palace, and they arrange this elaborate escape from the palace when she and Baldwin Ironarm decide that they are in love. And then when they leave and they escape, then it involves both her brother Louis and also their younger brother Charles, the young prince. And then they are chased across Europe, and they seek refuge with her cousin Lothar, because the brother Lothar is now dead, and the cousin Lothar, and then the brother of King Charles the Bald, his brother Lothar has died, and his son Lothar is now. There's a sub story going on there. A lot happens in these 7 years, and there's a war that takes place. Louis the German ultimately invades Francia, and there's a miracle that takes place. It's called the Miracle War. And if Francia had not won that war, then they would be speaking German. I guess it would have all gone to Louis the German. Yeah. And so that's an important part of history. It was called the Miracle Bloodless War.
Interesting.
Although it wasn't completely bloodless, but it was referred to as that. And then they have to ultimately flee to the Pope and plead their case before the Pope. And the Pope takes their side. Ultimately, they become the founding couple of what becomes eventually Belgium. But there's a lot that takes place in between all of this.
Yeah. It's interesting how, a chain of events that happened centuries ago, modes the world that we have today. You obviously are very enthusiastic about that time period. You know a lot of the details. By my estimation, I could be wrong, that's a period of history that isn't extremely well documented. So do you want to talk a little bit about your research method? How did you do your research, and kind of, because so much of this book is built around historical events. So how did you go about that?
Okay, so it is actually quite well documented, but mainly in Latin.
I see.
We are grateful for those who have taken the time to translate a lot of that. There's a huge, multi-volume set called the MGH, and it's basically volumes of history. And sometimes I even was able to get conversations that took place between several of the kings.
Oh, wow.
Or between the king and the Archbishop Hincmar, who was a very prolific writer of the 9th century. And actually, his writings were what his treatise on divorce, called Divortio, actually formed the Catholic Church's position against divorce, which continued and still continues in many ways, but continued very much into our modern times. And what's interesting is you can see in the book the reason why he wrote that. And it was all political. He did not want Lothar II to divorce his queen because he wanted Charles the Bald to get Lothar II's country when Lothar II died. So he said, no, divorce is because Lothar is trying to divorce his queen. He has a concubine and he has children by the concubine, but he never wanted to be forced into marrying this woman who was his queen. So he spends the whole time through these 7 years and longer trying to get rid of his queen and put his concubine and his children in place. Ultimately, he fails. He does die early, and Charles the Bald and Louis the German split his kingdom. So part of France, part of Germany was Lothar's kingdom.
Interesting.
It's fascinating because that you see a lot of the reason why there's lawfare waged against his queen. There's rumors spread. They try to destroy her through that. You see, actually, because Judith marries a commoner, which was absolutely forbidden, her brothers also do the same. And Lothar is trying to do the same. So we have 4 royals trying to upset the whole idea that the king tells you who you can marry. Both daughters and sons. If they had ultimately been successful, that would have changed how all royals, the royal children, their free will to marry, but they weren't. The sons actually caved, even and gave up their wives because of Charles the Bald's pressure. Judith didn't. She and Baldwin went on to rebuild Bruges, which was a wreck, and created one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. And they are the founding couple of Bruges, or considered that. A lot of their lore and history, they revolve around one of the events in the book where Baldwin slays a huge bear in protection of Judith when they are fleeing from Charles the Bald. And it's funny because you go to Bruges today and they have statues of the bear, and you can buy the Bear of Bruges chocolates and the Bear of Bruges beer. And it's funny because that little story has been handed down for 1,200 years.
Yeah. You know, in the process of writing a book like this, obviously you have historical elements, and of course it's a novel, so there's characters that you've created. And you know, a lot of times when you watch a TV program or something like that, and they say this story is based on historical events, blah 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 blah. And the reason they have that disclaimer in there is because sometimes historical events just aren't that interesting. So you have to put in, you know, a little story and, you know, get the romance going and the betrayal and all this to suck the audience in. How do you strike that balance? Do you feel sometimes that you are betraying the historical accuracy at times, and or does it work the other way? Do you feel that the historical events help propel your characters into a good story?
In this instance, it was quite different. I kept being surprised by the story. I actually took something called the Annals of St. Burton, which were the chronicles kept by the monks of the Abbey of St. Burton. And I used that as my story. My intention was to just tell the story of what happened originally. Mm-hmm. And this was just going to be, something so I could tell my children and grandchildren what exactly happened. I ended up filling in gaps, but I used that and all the events that take place are real. Mm-hmm. What I filled in was a couple of characters are of my creation, mainly servants. Mm-hmm. And the one who is a main character, who is a servant, who I created was Judith's handmaid. Mainly because history tells us that she escaped from the palace dressed as a peasant and as a servant. And I thought, how do you escape from the palace dressed as a servant without your servant's help? And why would your servant be so devoted and loving if she hadn't been with you all along? Mm-hmm. So and even that servant, I tell her story, although she's a made-up character. I took events from the day and gave them to her, assigned them to her as her story. But there were so many fascinating things that happened, and I would think, this can't be true. This is real. But truth is sometimes stranger than fiction.
It sure is.
And I found the story was fascinating. The story was absorbing and exciting enough that I didn't have to make up things. I just had to dramatize it. Yeah. So in my mind, I was just trying to bring to life the real events that happened.
Yeah. Speaking about truth being stranger than fiction, they do say that history repeats itself. And it sounds to me like you went through a lot of detail through a certain period of history there. With what has transpired over the centuries, what's happening today. Is there an unavoidable parallel? Is there a certain mechanism when it comes to people and power and hoarding wealth and all these other kind of things that just can't be avoided? What is your perspective on that?
I had somebody ask me, well, how do you know what people felt like in the 9th century? And I thought, these people are people. Yep. We have the same passions. We have the same desires and needs. Your circumstances may be different, but our inner core, we're driven by the same things, which is why history repeats itself.
Right, sure.
And so you'll find in the book that there are greedy and selfish and passionate and kind, and all of those same things that make up humanity are in there. I found that there were parallels when you come to looking at people having to deal with the leaders, having to deal with other leaders who they don't like, who they don't respect, who are brutal, and yet they still have to make concession because you're the king. Mm-hmm. You don't have a choice. You've got, Lothar or Louis the German or the head of the Vikings or whatever. You've got to deal with them, even if they're doing things that you just despise. Mm-hmm. And I've also realized that nobody's all good or all bad. No. And sometimes our leaders, when they do things that they feel are best in the situation they're given, you can look at it and say, that's crazy. I wouldn't do that. But unless you've walked in their shoes, people might think, oh, King Charles, how could he marry off his daughter for political gain? But then you think, well, if I were surrounded by everybody trying to take over the country and destroy everything I've tried to build, that was kind of part of what she was expected to do, her part to save the kingdom.
Yeah.
And she was raised to be that way. I think the lawfare was surprising to me, trying to destroy people through the courts, trying to destroy people's reputation and using rumor and spreading lies. And ultimately, I have one of the characters saying, ultimately, people believe what they want to believe.
Yes, they do.
And, it goes both ways.
Sure. That's very true today.
It is very true.
There can be something happen. There's a video. And the people who want to believe one narrative see one thing. The people who want to believe another narrative see another thing.
Absolutely.
And I think it's gotten worse. It was always that way. But I think sometimes people these days are living in their own reality. You seem to be very, appreciative of history in general. My father was a Civil War expert. He dragged me around all the different battlefield sites and everything else when I was a young boy. And actually, I think he did it when I was a little too young, because when you're, 7 or 8 years old, you really don't have a good perspective on where your own existence lies in terms of history, But it was a good experience. So I'm pretty well versed on that time period in history. Is there a time period that you find fascinating other than the ones you write about? Is there something that really, was it World War II or anything like that?
I find Civil War also very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of politics going on there.
Yes.
And a lot of things that people don't realize that they're surprised about when they find out. But I find, actually, you're right. I love history in general. I wanted to major in history. I thought about it, but my husband talked me out of it. But it's true that when we go to any place I am at as a visitor, I'm looking for the history of it.
Yeah.
I want to go to the museums. I want to, understand the culture and how they got the way they are, how things have developed in their country. I find that fascinating.
Yes. What else would, I always say when it comes to talking about your book as an author, with anything you can reveal about yourself, people really like to like their authors. Is there anything, like Hemingway? I mean, you say that name, his name is a brand. People are interested in anything he has to say, or, because of, the lore of Hemingway. He's a brand. Is there anything about yourself? Obviously, I'll say nerd when it comes to history. I'm a nerd when it comes to computers and stuff. We all have our nerdy side. Is there anything a little quirky about yourself you would like to reveal to your potential audience and readers?
I love dogs. I am an absolute dog lover. I do love theater and music. I graduated, my undergrad turned out, it was in theater and music. Did a lot of acting in my younger days. And I see, actually, when I write, it's more of that type of process. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I will get all the facts and know exactly what happened in an event. And then I like to just sleep on it, literally. Mm-hmm. And I like to try to dream about it and see it in vision, in picture form. Mm-hmm. And try to envision, what did that look like? What did that attack look like? What did that siege look like? What did the Viking, experience with the Viking bribery and ransom, paying the ransom? How did that happen? What did that look like? And then I try to write it, what I see. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a good method. An interesting method, and how writers write is something that a lot of people are interested in. So that's a good tidbit of information. We have been speaking to D.H. Morris. Now, her name's Deborah, but Deborah Morris is a name that there's a lot of people called that. So she goes by D.H. Morris. That is the author name. The book is The Girl of Many Crowns. Where can people find the book? Where can they buy the book? And what can they find out more about you?
Well, the book is available pretty much wherever you would normally expect to find books: Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And they can always go to newclassicspublishing.com, has some information about me. I really think this book is one for those who love history, mm-hmm. with a touch of romance, a lot of excitement, if you like the Viking era. Someone said this is kind of like Game of Thrones in a way, mm-hmm. but it's more, I would say, tamer in mm-hmm. in that these are real events, yeah. and not overblown.
Yeah.
And if you want to know what life was really like during that period of time, this is absolutely researched to the full degree. I was afraid to write anything without researching it. I thought, I don't even know how they had babies. How did they, what was the process? What did the room look like? What was their medicine? Everything is researched, and you'll feel like you step back in time.
Well, that's a great point, because it's also stepping back in time. Obviously, if you have an appreciation for history in general, or maybe this time period, you'll be that much more intrigued by the book. But I would also encourage you, if you're not familiar with this time period, that's all the more reason to check something like this out, because there's certain time periods that are well covered. Okay. Cleopatra, well covered. Civil War, quite frankly, well covered. And if I never hear anything again the rest of my life about the Titanic, it'll be too soon. Okay. So this is a time period that, you can kind of, and actually Game of Thrones did borrow a lot from this time period in terms of how they dressed and how they acted and everything. So, this is something that, you can get into. It's a time period that isn't well covered, both historically and, like she said, it was written in Latin. And in terms of stories, unless they're pure fiction, you don't have a whole lot of stories coming out of that. So for all those reasons, this would be a good book to check out. And I'll say the name one more time. The Girl of Many Crowns, the name of the book. Author D.H. Morris, that's who we have been talking to. Any final parting words?
I think this book is one to inspire young people, both young men. Sometimes they don't get strong, fighting, masculine heroes. There's one here. And
Good.
Young women need to know they can be strong too. Yeah. And they can stand up and unite and go for their dreams.
Yeah.
And be successful. And it's a happy ending. So that's rare too. At the end of the book, I have an appendix that tells exactly what happened to each of the characters in their life and how it ended up, so that you're not left hanging, because it does only cover 7 years.
Wow. That is unique. That's awesome. Deborah, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for coming by and sprinkling this little bit of history on us. That's very intriguing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Billy.
Sure. My name is Billy Dees. Now, you can find the Billy Dees podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. We have about a 10-year history in all the major podcast platforms. So we're real easy to find. As far as social media goes, probably my social media home is X, which at one time was Twitter, and at Billy Dees there. So you can check me out and kind of follow what's going on with the podcast there if you like. Thank you so much for listening to our program today, and we will talk to you again very soon. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.